Undercover boss orders pancakes at brunch spot stops, cold when waitress says tips don't even buy dinner. In the gentle light of the early morning, brunch spot gradually opened its doors to customers with the aroma of pancakes and coffee, blending together to paint a familiar warm picture. The atmosphere was always lively here with laughter and conversation mingling with the sizzling sound of pancakes on the hot griddle. All of it like a morning symphony, familiar yet full of vitality. Michael Foster, the founder of Brunch Spot, 50-year-old CEO, stepped through the glass and wood door, his hand lightly brushing the handle as if touching a memory. His eyes swept the cafe, once his pride, once the dream he had turned into reality with his own hands in many sleepless nights. The morning light streaming through the window reflected on Michael's now silvered hair, highlighting the contemplative look of a man who had spent his youth building this place into a second home for so many. In front of him, Brunch Spot appeared as a bright painting, warm wooden chairs, a spotless bar lined with neatly arranged cups, blackboards, with today's menu written in slightly smudged white chalk, honey butter pancakes, cinnamon rolls, dark roast Americano. Every corner of the cafe brought back memories for Michael of those early days when he stood behind the pastry counter sleeves, rolled up carefully measuring each drop of coffee to make the perfect cappuccino for his guests. But beneath that serene surface, Michael knew something had changed. Lately, he'd been hearing murmurs, a wave of resignations, customer complaints about service, and especially tips once distributed fairly so everyone could make ends meet now twisted into something that made people suspicious. Michael had always believed that Brunch Spot was a place where every employee was treated fairly, where fairness wasn't just a slogan but the foundation of trust. And yet now that very place was under suspicion. His eyes rested on the faces of the busy staff. Some faces he knew well, faces that had once called him Boss Michael, with bright eyes, eyes full of trust and gratitude. But today their eyes held something different, averted gazes, hesitant steps, rushed nods. He saw the dark circles under some of their eyes, the trembling shoulders beneath their aprons, all of them bracing themselves against something invisible and heavy. Michael lightly tugged at the collar of his simple shirt, his hand unconsciously resting on the napkin on the table, as if to steady himself. Today he wore no CEO name tag, had no assistant or manager with him. Today he was just a stranger, undercover, determined to see for himself what was happening here. He wanted to hear with his own ears the things that had never been spoken, to see with his own eyes the looks that had once believed in him, to find the root cause of why the dream of fairness he had built was now being betrayed. A young waitress glanced at Michael, her eyes momentarily reflecting a mix of surprise and suspicion before quickly disappearing behind a weary smile. She carried a tray of delicious-smelling pancakes, hurrying past a nearby table, her hands trembling slightly, her eyes searching for something warm to cling to. Michael sighed softly, his heart tightening, as he thought of all the hopes he had invested in this place. He looked around the cafe at the old posters telling stories of the grand opening days, the photos capturing moments of staff laughing together. This place had once been his pride, the place where he believed fairness was always the top priority. But now he knew fairness didn't just live in speeches or revenue reports. Fairness was in the eyes of those smiling behind the bar, in the sweat on the collars of the servers, in the tips shared equally so that everyone could make a living and call this place home. And today Michael returned not as a proud CEO, but as a stranger wanting to rekindle the fading flame of trust. He knew if he didn't stand up, that flame would die out, and Brunch Spot would forever be just another eatery, nothing more, and that he would never allow to happen. Under the pale yellow light of the morning, Brunch Spot wore a strange calm, a calm that concealed stories never told. Michael Foster sat in the corner of the cafe, his hands trembling slightly as he held a warm cup of coffee, his eyes scanning every little detail, the neatly folded napkin, the sound of a spoon hitting a porcelain plate, the labored breathing of the staff behind the bar. Every sound, every gesture, every look felt like a reminder of the responsibility of a founder, a responsibility he had once sworn to carry on his shoulders. Amidst that atmosphere, the young waitress Lily appeared like a lingering melancholic note. Her hair was slightly disheveled, a few strands dancing in the air from the air conditioner, her face sun-kissed, her eyes shadowed with the marks of sleepless nights. Her hands trembled as she carried a plate of golden pancakes, the very pancakes Michael had once taught the chefs to perfect. The smell of butter blended with a touch of honey warmed the room, but Lily's eyes told a different story. They were tired, tense, and held something like a long-suppressed burden, a story never spoken aloud. Michael watched closely and saw that she was always assigned to the slow shifts, the ones with few customers and barely any tips. Her steps through the cafe were slow, lacking the rush and passion of a young person with dreams of changing her life. The yellow light fell on her shoulders, casting faint wrinkles on the hem of her uniform, marks of months of exhausting work. When Lily set the plate of pancakes in front of Michael, her hand trembled and her voice came out low and shaky, like a leaf in the cold wind. "The tips here, they're not enough for me to afford a decent dinner every day." Michael froze. He heard each word like a cold knife, slicing deep into his heart. The heart of a founder who had once believed that Brunch Spot was not just a cafe but a second home, a place where staff were treated fairly, where every drop of sweat was honored. And now, with one simple sentence, Lily had exposed all the dark corners he'd never even imagined, the heartbreaking truth that trust had been betrayed. The clink of a spoon against the pancake plate sounded like a shattering note in the silence. Michael gripped the coffee cup tightly, his eyes fixed on the drops of honey, slowly dripping onto the pancake. Each drop like a silent tear, the accumulation of so many days and nights of injustice that people like Lily had endured. He knew just one sentence from that young girl was enough to awaken an entire dream, a dream he had once poured his whole heart into. Michael understood that moment had become an earthquake, a small confession with a powerful force. It didn't just hurt him, it felt like a cry for help, a cry for all those who stood behind the bar day and night, wiping down each table, carrying each plate of hot pancakes, smiling at customers while their hearts bled. And Michael knew he could no longer wait any longer. Michael sat silently, the coffee cup in his hand had gone cold, but his heart was burning like fire. His eyes scanned across Brunch Spot, the cafe he had built with his own hands. Every brick, every table, every picture on the wall, all of it once a symbol of trust and fairness. But now, under the yellow light shining down on the bar, he saw a completely different picture, a picture stained with injustice and a coldness that cut to the heart. He saw a group of young employees' uniforms, crisp hair, neatly combed eyes glinting with triumph and arrogance. They strolled confidently through the cafe, their posture exuding the certainty that all the rewards had already been locked in their grasp. The yellow light cast its glow on their faces, highlighting smiles steeped in entitlement, the smiles of those hand-picked to receive high tips, to work the peak hours when customers flooded in. Michael watched as they exchanged knowing nods, a silent signal only understood by those in the safe circle. But in the corner of the cafe, the sight of the young waitress left him speechless. She stood there, the yellow light illuminating every drop of sweat on her worn collar, her hands trembling as she wiped the bar, as if afraid of losing the last bit of strength she had left. Her eyes were lost, tired, and seemed to be searching for a refuge in a crowd where she had never found one. Each step she took felt unsteady on the wooden floor, each footstep sounding like the labored breath of the very dream of fairness that Michael had once built. Michael took a deep breath, his gaze landing on the POS, the cash register he had once been so proud of, because it symbolized transparency. But the pale blue light from the screen shone on the cold-as-ice face of a young employee and made him shiver. The boy stood there, his fingers dancing across the screen like a concert pianist on a keyboard, each beep sounding like a cold knife cutting straight into Michael's heart. Each tip amount appeared and then vanished, as if that very blue light was devouring the sweat and tears of people like the young waitress. Michael couldn't take his eyes off the screen, a place where just a few keystrokes could rob someone of the fruits of their hard-earned labor. The pain surged through him like a wave, the pain of a founder who had once put his whole trust in the fair tip-sharing model, who had once counted out every tip by hand for his employees, pouring his heart into every penny. He remembered their eyes back then, eyes that shone like stars, the eyes of people who believed that if they just worked hard enough, every drop of their sweat would be rewarded fairly. But now the eyes of that young waitress were different. They were etched with fear, helplessness, and a gaze that seemed to be pleading for a miracle. Michael knew she had tried to do the right thing. She had quietly kept records of every tip that went missing, every unfairly scheduled shift, every threatening message from those behind the POS screen. Those small pieces of paper, those trembling handwritten notes, were like silent screams from someone too afraid to speak out. Michael could picture her small hand trembling as she put pen to paper, her eyes darting nervously around the cafe, like a thief stealing light, afraid of being discovered and losing her last foothold. He closed his eyes, each breath blending with the sighs of the young people who had once called this place their second home. Each beat of his heart felt like a vow left unspoken. How did I let this happen? The yellow light shone down on his face, highlighting each crow's footmarks left by time, by sleepless nights, pondering a brunch spot that was fair, humane. Michael understood this was not just a battle against a fraudulent POS system, but a battle to reclaim the trust he had once put his whole heart into building. He knew just one right decision, one click to change the tip-sharing policy, could reignite the dwindling flame of trust and breathe new life into the brunch spot he had once proudly called a second home. Under the increasingly gloomy yellow light, Michael felt a chill, as if betrayal had seeped directly into his heart. Each secret glance exchanged among the privileged employees felt like invisible knives slicing into his chest. He remembered countless sleepless nights when he had personally distributed every tiny tip to each person with a firm belief that fairness was not just a principle, it was the soul of Brunch Spot. Now that soul was being twisted and shattered into numbers disappearing from the POS screen into the cold beeps that should have been the music of fairness. Michael took a deep breath, as if inhaling the pain of the hard-working people there, the hunched eyes, the trembling hands serving pancakes, the little scraps of paper, hiding the dream of justice. He decided to get up and walk towards the pancake counter, where the yellow light shone down on the young waitress's face like a slow-motion film still. Each step he took, the wooden floor seemed to echo with old whispers, words of thanks, eyes full of hope from long ago. Her hand trembled as she arranged the plates, her eyes staring into the distance, as if that gaze held all the unspoken feelings that words couldn't capture. Michael stood beside her, resting his hand lightly on the edge of the counter, a simple touch, but heavy with the memories of years gone by. He glanced at the POS, his eyes locking with the young employee's cold, challenging stare, a gaze used to privilege, used to seeing the tip amounts disappear like magic. Michael felt his chest tighten. Each heartbeat now echoed with the memories of all those sleepless nights alongside the dedicated employees, the people who had once placed their absolute trust in him. He lifted his head, the yellow light illuminating his face, that light highlighting the crow's feet, the traces of sacrifices left unspoken. For a moment, Michael heard his own laughter from days gone by, the laughter of a founder who had once believed wholeheartedly that Brunch Spot would always be a place of fairness. But now that laughter faded into the emptiness, leaving behind only the sighs of the sweat that had been stolen. He looked at the young waitress, her eyes glistening, ready to spill tears from someone whose hope had been utterly drained. Michael knew she was afraid of losing her job, afraid of retaliation, afraid of the strange looks behind her back. But it was that very gaze, trembling yet still shining like a flickering candle in the darkness, that reminded him why he was there. Not just to investigate a fraudulent POS system, but to rekindle the light of fairness that had been extinguished in the hearts of the people he had once promised to protect. In that moment, Michael could clearly hear his own breathing mingled with the steady beep of the POS system, as if each beep was a declaration of war against everything he had once believed in. He knew a fraudulent POS system was only the tip of the iceberg. Beneath that surface lay an entire system being manipulated by opportunists, and he, the founder of Brunch Spot, could not turn a blind eye. He placed his hand on the counter, his voice resonating from his chest, powerful, like a vow. I will not let another drop of sweat disappear without a trace. I will not let the eyes that once called this place home lower themselves. And I will not let fairness be twisted by those who only know how to press buttons and adjust numbers. Michael closed his eyes for a second, letting his breath blend with the breath of all those who had placed their trust here. Then he opened his eyes, the golden light shining on his forehead, reflecting the gaze of a man who had risen to fight not just for himself, but for all the hearts that had once believed Brunch Spot was their second home. And he knew just one right decision, just one small change in the POS system, he could regain everything. He would reignite the flame of faith that had nearly died and turn Brunch Spot into a place where fairness was not just an empty promise, but a reality etched into every pancake plate, every smile of those who had called this place their second home. Amid the bustling morning rush, Michael Foster stood up straight, the wooden chair beneath him, creaking like a wake-up call to everyone in the Brunch Spot where he had once poured his entire heart into building. The golden light shone down on his face, the face of a founder who had once personally shared every single tip, every step behind the pancake counter, every laugh with his staff. His eyes now shone with a steely, unwavering resolve, the gaze of a father protecting his spiritual child. He raised the stack of evidence that Lily had quietly gathered, the manipulated tip numbers, the unfair shift schedules, and the threatening messages reeking of fear. Each page, printed with bold letters, was like a knife, slicing through every false mask like a lamp, illuminating the long-hidden truth. The golden light shone on every number on the pages, revealing them as undeniable evidence. His voice rang out deep but firm like steel, forged in countless sleepless nights. This is your sweat and tears stolen by these very managers. From today, every tip will go to the rightful person. The air thickened. Spoons on tables, stopped clinking, conversations fell silent. The blue glow of the POS system, the very light Michael had once considered a symbol of transparency, now illuminated the manager's face, highlighting beads of sweat rolling down his temple, the sweat of humiliation and fear. His shoulders shook violently like a man who had been stripped bare before justice, before the very people whose sweat he had shamelessly stolen. Michael turned his gaze toward Lily. The young girl, the one who had broken his heart with her words about not even affording dinner now, stood tall, her eyes glistening with tears. But those were no longer tears of fear or resignation. They were tears of a faith, newly reborn faith in justice, faith in a fairer tomorrow. The golden light shone on her face, turning her into a beacon of hope for all who had once silently fallen in the shadows. In that moment, Michael felt his heart pounding, as if it were beating in sync with the breaths of all the people around him, the ones who had once called this place their second home. He knew it wasn't just words, but this very courage, this very voice, this very decision that could change everything. Because fairness wasn't a luxury, it was something he had once sweated to build, and today, fairness had finally been called by its rightful name. Michael lifted his fiery gaze to each face of the employees, watching him the faces he had once believed would be the solid bricks to build a sunrise cafe filled with trust and hope. Now, under the warm golden light, he saw those eyes, eyes of fear, eyes of surprise, and eyes that sparked a yearning for fairness. Each look was like a whisper that he heard so clearly. Will justice truly be called today? He lowered the stack of evidence, the ceiling light shining down on the papers, highlighting the tampered numbers and shift schedules reeking of deceit. He knew evidence alone wasn't enough to unmask those who had twisted the trust of the staff, but it was his voice, his heart, that was the torch to burn down that wall of lies. Michael turned his head, his gaze settling on the POS, where not long ago he had stood with those who first laid the foundation of this cafe, personally distributing every tip to employees with the unshakable belief that sweat will never be stolen. Now that very place had become a gateway for the sneaky for mouse clicks that funneled one person's tips into another's pocket. The POS beep, that sound had once made him proud. Now it was a damning accusation. The green light from the screen illuminated the trembling hands of the manager, the very hands that had signed the commitment to transparent tip sharing, now the very hands that betrayed the sweat of honest workers. His voice rang out again, slower this time, but each word as firm as stone. I built this place so all of you could have a second home, a place where every drop of sweat would be respected, paid its fair worth. But today I stand here not just to place blame, but to remind us of why we began a cafe built from the heart, not from tricks. From this moment on, every tip will belong to the rightful person. No one is allowed to steal the labor of another. Michael paused, his breath heavy, but his eyes still shone like an unyielding flame. The entire cafe fell into a strange silence, as if everyone was looking deep within themselves, wondering, did they have the courage to stand on the side of the light, or would they continue to bow under the darkness? Lily stood nearby, golden light shining on her shoulders like a fragile suit of armor. Her eyes glistened with tears, but they no longer trembled like they had that morning, because she knew those tears were now a testament to courage, a testament to faith reborn. Michael smiled at her, his eyes sending a wordless promise. You did it. You lit the hope with your own tears. He turned back to look at everyone, the people who had once called him boss, the people who had once called this cafe their home. His voice was low but resonant, like a bell ringing in the night. If anyone still doubts it, then today I stand here to say fairness is not just in a revenue report. Fairness is in the way we treat each other, in every drop of sweat that has fallen to build this place. A bead of sweat fell from his forehead to the wooden floor, blending with the golden light like an eternal vow from the founder. No matter how difficult, I will protect fairness for you. The cafe seemed to exhale a sigh of relief, as if it too had shed a heavy burden that had clung to it for so long. In that moment, Michael knew the flame of trust had been rekindled once more, and nothing could extinguish it anymore. The golden morning light shone down on the space of the brunch spot. The breath of a new day seemed fresher, warmer. Michael stood silently, watching his eyes following the busy footsteps of the employees as they prepared to open the cafe, but his gaze lingered longer on Lily, the young girl who had once timidly said, "Tips aren't enough for a decent dinner," every day. Now Lily stood tall in her new uniform, her name tag neatly pinned to her chest, Lily Shift Manager. The golden light shone in her eyes no longer worried or fearful, but glowing with a strange pride. The smile on her face was as radiant as the early morning sunshine, her eyes reflecting the faith that Michael once thought had long vanished from this place. Now Brunch Spot was no longer a place where employees had to go hungry or eat leftovers, no longer a place where their eyes wandered like ghosts in their own home. They stood together smiling as they started their shifts, confident that today, every dollar of their tips would be distributed fairly, no longer secretly pocketed by anyone. Every tip now was a recognition of effort, the value of the sweat that had dripped onto the wooden floor, where every step was marked by hope. Michael remembered the nights he sat restlessly at his desk, hands trembling as he drafted the tip policy, each line reflecting the trust he had once built with all his heart. Just a small sign hung by the POS, just a single line explaining to customers the meaning of tips for employees. Everything became clear, transparent. And he knew just one click on the POS, a short meeting to agree on a fair tip distribution, that was enough to revive an entire system, to return the trust of those who had once believed in him with all their hearts. He stood silently watching Lily instruct the new staff, her voice firm yet warm, her smile dissolving all worries. She was not just a shift manager, but a symbol of trust, reborn of justice, called by its rightful name. Michael felt his heart beat faster, a teardrop glistening on his eyelashes, blending into the golden light that illuminated the sweat of all those who had once stood by this pancake counter. Michael thought to himself, his voice softly resonating in his chest. A single tear has changed an entire system. And in that moment, Michael knew Sunrise Brunch Spot was not just a place that sold pancakes and coffee, but a home for all, dreams for every drop of sweat and tear. A place where fairness did not lie in cold, dry numbers, but in the way we treated those who had helped us build it. How many more waitresses live on tips they never get? The final reminder, ringing like a call to action. Share this video, let justice be called by its rightful name, let the light of hope be kindled everywhere. Fairness is not in the cold numbers on a revenue report, nor in the graphs someone draws up to report each month. True fairness lies in the eyes of those who once stood behind the pancake counter, wiping down every table, making every cup of coffee, and shedding every drop of sweat to turn this place into a second home. It lives in every smile they gave to customers, in every tear they swallowed while still managing to smile. Fairness is when a drop of sweat gets its rightful due, when tears are no longer forgotten, when every dollar of tips is shared fairly with the one who deserves it. And more than anything, fairness is when those people, the ones who once called this place home, are treated as companions, not just as meaningless numbers. Michael stood silently looking at the brunch spot, shining brightly in the golden light, his eyes reflecting trust. Because in the end, he knew a cafe or any business would only truly endure when it was built on a foundation of kindness and fairness. And that's why today that golden light did not just rekindle hope, but also reignited the flame of a sunrise brunch spot he had once poured his entire heart into building.